Hello, everybody. My name is Keith Freeze, the unofficial outsider of the LA Kings. Well, there is some news to report, and as you can see on the screen here, we've got some reactions from X. And we'll start at the top with Kyle Garcia noting that Jacob Moverare is the only player the Kings have placed on waivers today per Puckpedia. And then Kyle chimed in and said, Andreas Englund somehow survives another roster cut. I'll get more to that in a second in terms of my opinion, but Clark for Norris kind of had a similar sentiment and said Rob Blake really watched yesterday's game and thought, yeah, England's way better than Moverare. Karo Bleekian also brought up the whole England Moverare kind of dynamic in terms of who's staying and who's going, saying this is more or less where I'm at. When looking at the Go Kings Go and what they were attempting to put together this season, Edmondson to England makes more sense than Edmondson to Moverare. Maybe not what I would do, but I understand it. I think this is probably a little bit more of a rational understanding. I wish Caro would elaborate a little bit more because I think he's onto it, but I just would like to hear his opinion a little bit more. I'll give you my opinion in a moment, but I do think he's onto something there a little bit. Next, we've just got P, or the notorious PNG. Represent baby. So it says, I'm not even sure why England is necessary after spending $3+ million per year on Edmondson. Who's going to claim England? Perhaps the same argument with Moverare, but not sure why the team is so anti-him. He's more than adequate at any time he gets a shot. I do agree with that. Basically he has been very good in terms of the times that he's been called up. And, if sometimes it kind of shocks me a little bit that they'll be like, oh, he's only played 45 games in the NHL. It feels like it's been more than that. Even though he's kind of been limited in terms of how many games he's actually gotten to play, just because he is that steady hand that they call up. And I think it's one of those things where if NHL rosters could hold 24 players, he'd be the 24th guy. That's the best way I can kind of explain it from the Kings position. It seems like they really like him. They want to keep him around, but they just don't have enough roster spots. That said, I did a video this morning where I said that the Kings should keep 15 forwards and 6 defensemen with 2 goaltenders. That'd be the 23-man roster. But I could also see a scenario where if they do keep a 7th defenseman, now that Doughty's on the shelf, I think it is Moverare. Granted, he's just been placed on waivers. That's the whole point of this video. But I do think that he could and should be the 7th defenseman. I'll get more into my opinion in just a moment, but I will just say that kind of briefly, I think what it is that, you have to look at it from the perspective that they're trying to keep teams from claiming certain guys. And the earlier that you do that, where you're getting down to the point where teams are finalizing their 23-man roster, if you do it a little earlier, then if a team does claim him, then that means they really had an interest in him and they were going to go out and get him. Versus if you do it as one of your last cuts, like, teams might have an open spot or they might be on the fence about somebody. Now you're kind of forcing teams to make a decision. I'm sure there's a certain timeline that certain GMs like to send certain guys down, and I think this is just the case where Rob Blake just thought this is the right time to send Moverare down through waivers and try and get him through. The Reign just started their training camp yesterday, and I think this is probably part of that too. Like, let's not waste too much time getting him down there and getting him into some practices with the Reign, getting ready for the season. That's these are all just the bigger points that anybody would know. And in fact, all the people that you see on the screen here for all their tweets, I'm sure that they, by the way, is it tweets anymore or is it X's? Like, if we're going to call it X, so are we still tweeting? Nobody clarified that to me. Anyway, the point is that, all the points that are on the screen, they all know this. They all know the basic concept of like the right time to send somebody down or not. I think the bigger point is just like, if Moverare, I think the bigger sentiment that people are saying is Moverare has a bigger ceiling and more talent than an Andreas Englund. But I'm going to circle back to that because I'm, you know, I'll save my opinion, my bigger opinion for the end. But to kind of go back to the notorious PNG's comment, it does say that again, it says like who's going to claim England. I think that's probably a bigger, probably more accurate question. I don't think teams would claim England. I think teams would claim Moverare, and I think that's an excellent point that he's making, which is, teams are probably not going to claim Andreas Englund. He's making $1 million. I mean, whatever. But anyway, in terms of teams claiming potential people, we've got a tweet here from New York Ranger Louis. Yes, I did see a New York Ranger fan chime in about this, and he says Jacob Moverare has some decent impacts last year and would be a better depth than Harper and Mackey. Only 26 years old. I would take a flyer on him if I was Drury. Big body, good stick work, just a thought. Well, I think it's an excellent thought, and if you feel like Moverare is a step above some of the other people that you have in your third pairing, I mean, why not? Why not take a shot on it? It's not going to hurt you anything. He's not making that much money. And, if you claim him and you give him some playing time, he might show you exactly. You can look at it two ways. He might show you why he deserves more games, or he might show you why he's only played 45. I mean, personally, I think that he should be playing more games. I think he's more than capable. And if the Rangers jumped on it and they took a chance on grabbing him, more power to them. Look at how it's turned out with some of the other teams that have grabbed the Kings prospects over the years. I mean, it's not the worst idea, and if they feel like it's an upgrade, it's certainly an easy fix to grab a guy at that contract rate. You're not going out and getting an Andreas Englund for $1 million versus a Jacob Moverare who's making less than $1 million. I think that kind of goes back to, PNG's point, which is just that, who's going to claim Englund? He's making $1 million, and, it's not, I don't think, I'm not going to try and put words in PNG's mouth, but I'll just say compared to the tweet with like New York Ranger Louis, which is just that, I think Drury and Mackey would be an upgrade over Englund, but I don't think necessarily that Harper and Mackey would be an upgrade over Moverare. So you kind of have to look at it from that perspective, not just about these tweets, but just about Moverare and the whole Kings situation with depth anyway. And then finally, we've got this last tweet from Joe W. Paterino. He says, I don't know what the LA Kings don't see in Jacob Moverare. They like him enough to keep him in the organization for emergency scenarios. They break the glass, but they refuse to let him ho-hum his way to effectiveness as the left defensive third pairing defenseman. So I agree. I mean, they need to give Moverare some chances. The whole thing is you look at their depth chart, and I'm going to go back to kind of like the point that the guy made about Edmondson, which is they're paying Edmondson, $3+ million. I think it's something like $425 per year. But it's, you look at their depth chart, and Gavrikov is on the last year of his deal. I don't want to drag Gavrikov into this conversation, but I'm just trying to make a quick point here. But Gavrikov is making like $5+ million a year. He's on the last year of his deal. Who's to say that the Kings might be in a position where they trade Gavrikov at, the trade deadline or before then, something like that. And in that case, Edmondson moves up to Gavrikov's spot because the money makes sense there. And this is when a Moverare would step in as the third pairing left shot defenseman. And, I kind of think that was the Kings' plan recently to do that, but they didn't execute it in terms of they kept Gavrikov, they kept Edmondson, and I don't think that's the wrong decision. I actually think it's the right decision. You need depth on your defense. I think it is smart to have Gavrikov and Edmondson, but I think they were planning for the eventual possibility that Gavrikov moves on and Edmondson can move up. That's why they paid him so much money, and it could be justified in terms of the fans that complain about we paid Edmondson too much. It's like, well, we're not paying him that much if he's now the second pairing defenseman, and our third defenseman is Jacob Moverare, who's making less than $1 million. You see how that argument kind of cancels itself out now. So anyway, but I will say, in terms of all this, to kind of like put a bow on it, hopefully Jacob Moverare clears waivers. I do like Jacob Moverare, and I do think that he is that option that they will lean on in the future. That said, I also think that Andreas Englund is going to get sent down at some point. So all these people that are making these arguments like, oh, well, we held on to Englund. Why are we doing, we're not going to hold on to Englund. Englund's going to get sent down. He's making $1 million. He's going to clear waivers. People aren't going to touch that contract. And he's going to go down to Ontario. And Ontario is going to have a lot of redwoods down there. They're going to have a lot of big body defensemen. They're going to have a lot of grit and toughness. And, maybe that's probably a much more fitting area for Andreas Englund to be in anyway. The way I look at it, and I'm not trying to be rude about it, but I'm just going to be honest, I think the Kings would have liked to have signed Edmondson last year, but they couldn't do it. And they knew what they wanted on their third pairing, which was a big, stout, tough defender to play against. And they went and got Andreas Englund, who had some, draft stock. He was a former second-round pick. Look at me pulling a Nick Nixon. Anyway, but I think they thought, he had some toughness, some ability that maybe not had been tapped into, and that's probably why they leaned on him last year. And I don't think that he played terribly, but he certainly, it was a stopgap measure. And now that they filled that gap with Edmondson, there's really no place for Englund. And so I do think Englund is going to get sent down. So all these comments that are saying like, well, why Moverare, not Englund? It's like, no, England's coming too. So don't worry about that if that's what your worry is. And if there is a point when they do need to have another left shot defenseman, they're going to call up Moverare before they're going to call up Englund. Trust me on that. But either way, just some kind of interesting news to report. We'll see if Moverare clears waivers. We'll find out tomorrow morning. But either way, thank you for tuning in. Again, my name is Keith Freeze, the unofficial outsider of the LA Kings. Thank you for tuning in, and go Kings go.